title now is Can a Machine Be Conscious? And a philosophical reflection. So this talk is, oh, sorry. Let me just move this. This talk is a philosophical exploration of the question of whether a machine can be conscious. And it is divided into 5 sections, each reflecting on this question. As you can see on the screen, self-consciousness, the body, and 我ich, primal I, and the other in terms of intersubjectivity and anthropomorphism and the human-machine difference and relationship in existential and moral context. So the first 3 sections will briefly explore how Husserl, Edmund Husserl, philosopher, understood consciousness very, very briefly. Here, consciousness refers to human consciousness. Understanding human consciousness is our starting point for understanding consciousness in general. And based on this, we'll ask how we can approach the problem of machine consciousness. So I'll just raise a lot of questions. Because philosophy in the end is all about raising and making questions. So that's what we're trying to do here. And the next 3 sections will explore what it means for us to have machines with consciousness. The question of whether a machine can be conscious does not end with a simple yes or no. What is more important is what this question means for us. I will address these reflections in the conclusion. So first, let's look at self-consciousness, how Husserl tried to understand this. So can a machine be conscious? To answer this question, we must examine what it means to be conscious at all, which is fundamentally tied to the concept of self-consciousness for us, human consciousness. And for that, Husserl talks about intentionality and pre-reflective self-awareness. I mean, you probably are familiar with these by now. By intentionality, he means that consciousness is always conscious of something, meaning it's intentional. And it comes with, like every act of consciousness comes with this pre-reflective self-awareness, which means that you see yourself seeing. And it is always intersubjective, our self-consciousness. Self-consciousness is shaped through relations with others. The ego becomes aware of itself in relation to others, forming a shared world. And what's important for human consciousness, another element is temporality. So the self is primarily temporal, constituted through acts of consciousness that retain the immediate past and anticipate the future. This temporal flow forms the basis of our continuous sense of self. So far, you can see from here that, especially in the tradition of Western, so-called Western philosophical tradition, the discourse on consciousness is deeply and fundamentally related to subjectivity. So it's about self. It's a lot about mindness, I. So that is the focus that we should not forget about when we talk about consciousness in the domain of Western philosophy. So here we can have some questions surrounding machine consciousness related to what we just looked at. So first, like, can a machine be self-conscious, meaning that it has intentionality, which is subjective, as well as pre-reflective self-awareness? Would intersubjectivity be a necessary condition for a machine's consciousness? And does time matter to a machine? Can the machine be a temporal being, meaning that it can build a sense of self through its time consciousness? So these are the questions that we could ask. And let's talk about body. So for Husserl, his transcendental subjectivity is defined as cogito with the body, meaning consciousness is inherently tied to the body. Consciousness is deeply connected to bodily sensations, which form the boundary between the self and external stimuli. and it's deeply related to subjectivity. Subjectivity defines consciousness reflected in the feeling quality of all mental state. And here the body is key to self and identity, encapsulating essential elements like the nervous system. And here, as an embodied being, we have an embodied understanding. In embodied processing, understanding the whole comes before its parts, which is key to complex pattern recognition and which is very crucial to human understanding, human consciousness. So in sum, we can say subjectivity of consciousness is obtained through embodiment. Through the body, a subject can understand the given objects and their ungiven aspects as a whole, not as separate information. And here we should talk about the role of the unconscious in subjectivity as well, especially because it is related to our embodiedness. The unconscious processes of subjectivity is embodied and shared with others. It's beyond mechanical operations. It's about unconscious process related to subjectivity. So here, let's look at some other questions. So is a machine, or can a machine be an embodied entity like a human being or any other conscious creature? If the understanding of process of a machine can replicate that of human intelligence, even if the process itself is not embodied and the subject is not self-conscious, should a machine be considered conscious? Can a machine be considered conscious under the condition that a machine's body can be built just like or similar to that of human beings? So concerning this unconscious process, we could have a brief look at the concept of "我-ich" by Husserl. It is not widely known, but Husserl introduces this term, which is also very important to understanding his concept of transcendental subjectivity. So it's called "我-ich," primal I. Here he discusses the egoless process of consciousness that is outside of conscious reflection. But it's not very clear. Like there are not many researchers and research is done surrounding "我-ich," even in Husserlian philosophical tradition. So, and it's very it's not easy to define what "我-ich" really is because of this paradoxical nature. But essentially, it refers to the subjective ego, which is grounded in both the egoless stream of temporality and transcendental intersubjectivity. Though these aspects exist beneath the threshold of my consciousness, they are essential components in the formation of consciousness. And there are two tensions that we can look into concerning this concept of "我-ich." The first tension is between the egoless process and ego cogito. So let's see what Husserl said about this. The primal streaming of the transcendental life precedes the activity of the I. However, the very fact that this streaming of life precedes the activity cannot be recognized without the activity of the I. So two sound self-contradictory, but they are necessarily bound to each other. And the second tension is between I and the other I. The I this is not what Husserl said, but this is a philosopher, a Japanese philosopher named Shigeru Taguchi, who works on "我-ich" by Husserl. So he summarizes that the I recognize that it is just one member of various intersubjective communities. However, the ego cogito is essential, as without it, these communities would lose their validity. But these two, they're not a paradox. These tensions point to the core and the difficulty of grasping what consciousness is. It is self-conscious, but also not self-conscious. It is subjective, but also intersubjective. The infinite regress or circularity, however you define it and describe it, between these two contradictory primal elements might be the key to understanding and modeling consciousness. But how exactly, I'm not going to talk about here. Maybe next year. But let's have more questions at this point. So do machines share this egoless stream of temporality and the intersubjective life community with human beings, other machines, or and other sentient beings within their own self-consciousness, if they have consciousness at all? That was another question that I wanted to raise. So let's go to the next three sections. So these next three sections are more about how we, or like why we want the machines be conscious. So it's related to that question. And when it comes to consciousness, because it is within the context of Western philosophy, especially, like I keep saying, because it is most of the time subjective consciousness, the other mind is always the biggest problem. Because how can I know, like this famous problem of like solipsistic problem, like I am a subject and I believe that you are another subject, but you to me is always an object of my subject, So in that sense, like there's always this other minds problem. So let's look into this a little bit more. And the root of this problem, as I say, is the asymmetry of information, our lack of direct access to other minds compared to our own is the problem. So when we want to understand other minds, there are only limited methods available for us. One of them is analogical inference, meaning that we can only guess based on my own experience. So analogical inference relies on extrapolating from our own self-awareness to infer that others possess minds based on perceived similarities between ourselves and others. Dennett said once, we can only understand consciousness through human consciousness, the only kind is accessible to us concerning understanding or trying to talk about a machine consciousness or any other consciousness. So when investigating other minds, our only available reference point is our own mind, right? And the limitation, it mirrors the challenges posed by questions about the consciousness of machines. It ultimately circles back to the problem of other minds and the issue of anthropomorphism. Anthropomorphism and animism, like some other speakers, including Yosha already this morning, for example, were mentioned. And anthropomorphism and animism, and it's not a coincidence because they are inherent tendencies in human nature. Then it introduces the intentional stance, where we attribute human-like traits to systems, even when they differ from human cognition. And this approach reveals our anthropomorphic inclinations towards intentional systems. And now more and more, we encounter the machines and the systems that show that as if they had the mind, like they show this mind-like behaviors. Then it explores how mechanistic control systems can also exhibit seemingly mind-like behaviors even when devoid of consciousness. And this challenges traditional views of consciousness and highlights the complexity of mind-body interactions. But here the real problem that we encounter is the paradox of anthropomorphism and machines. We want machines to resemble us, but we also don't want them to be too much like us. Or do we? So let's talk more about this human-machine relation and difference. So can a machine be conscious? No, not yet, I think. But maybe yes, if consciousness and intersubjective dimension, unconscious and intersubjective dimensions of consciousness can be replicated somehow. But the real question here that I want to raise is, do we want a machine to be conscious? I mean, there are the moral dilemmas that we are familiar with, but when it comes to consciousness, human consciousness, it's fundamentally, profoundly related to our social, our being social. French language shows no distinction between conscious and conscience, hinting at the presence of the other in our consciousness. Even if robots aren't truly conscious like humans, they may be treated as sentient entities for our benefit. And how should we treat human-like robots? And should they be granted the same moral and legal rights as humans? I mean, these are the ongoing questions that I just cannot simply answer right now. But here I want to point this out in this context, entelechy of technology. So we have to ask, why does a machine exist? This is a teleological question. Telos, the end, purpose of technology lies not within itself, but within the human beings who use it. And in my 2018 paper, Entelechy of Technology, a philosophical analysis of the Anthropocene, I argue that technology exists for the sake of its users, not for its own sake. And here, the essence of the question lies in how we choose to engage with machines. Jeremy Bentham, a long time ago, once said, the key question is not can they reason, but can they suffer? Interactions with sentient beings and machines exhibiting mind-like behavior or possibly consciousness shape our behavior and attitudes. So what I mean is it matters to us, like whether, sorry? Okay, I'm done basically. It matters to us, like whether a machine is conscious or not conscious, it matters to us, not more than it does to them. And it sounds very, it could sound even trivial, but it's a core question that we have to hold on to. Why do we want them conscious, and why do we want to build them conscious? And when they do, then what does it mean, and how do we relate to them? And this is a very important, not only ethical, but existential and ontological and epistemological question. So this is the conclusion. So why do we ask the question, can a machine be conscious? What this question ultimately points to is not whether we can actually create a conscious machine, but rather how we should engage with machines. It is a question about the human-machine relationship, which in essence reflects the age-old dilemma about human mind and other beings. So, not only machines even, and I wanted to, I didn't, this is it, but I wanted to also mention it's important really for our sake, because not only machines, but within ourselves as well, we don't really treat each other nicely most of the time. I don't want to say most of the time, but a lot of times. So it's an important question because our relationship to the machines and in the near future, probably which is very much human-like, and how we interact with them and engage with them will affect us as an individual and us as a human group, our world. All right, thank you so much for your attention.